Let's open in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for this morning. We thank you for your watch over us. We thank you for beautiful weather. And Lord, especially thankful for Mother's Day and the opportunity we have to show appreciation to not just the mothers in our lives, but women in general, Lord. And thankful for your creation of them. Thankful for this service this morning, for the Sunday school hour, but for what Ben is going to bring to us, and looking forward to learning from your word. We offer up these prayer requests to you, Lord, for Pammy, and thankful that she was spared any major injury, Lord, but we know that she is dealing with some whiplash and headaches and pain. But know that you're watching over her, and just pray that you give her and Nathaniel continued strength and guidance as they walk through this. Lord, if there's something that needs to be taken care of with their vehicle situation, pray that that will go smoothly. If we as a church need to be made aware of things, just help us, Lord, to see that and to understand what we can do to help Nathaniel and Pammy during this time. We lift up Lou and John's brother-in-law, pray for his salvation ultimately, Lord, and that his heart will be softened, and that you will grant to him the gift of repentance, so that he will turn to you in faith. Lord, it's times like this in illness that he is hopefully being faced with his own mortality, and we do hope that it causes him to turn to you. We thank you for the WAs and their faithful time and service here at Montana Avenue, and pray for Jim and the boys as they are heading back east with the bulk of their stuff, and just preparing to make that permanent move. We lift up Nancy as she is at home right now by herself, and just pray that we're able to reach out to her and take care of any needs she may have, Lord. But I know they had a pretty solid plan in place as far as her being able to stay home during that time to take care of what is remaining. And do pray for Jim as he will be traveling back within the next week or so to take care of the last of stuff and make that final move. And then finally, Lord, we give you praise for Jackie's getting through the last steps she needed to and being able to celebrate her graduation, Lord. We're looking forward to what's to come with her ministry here at Montana Avenue, and thankful that the Kensingers are able to take a few days to celebrate as family and get some rest down in California as they just enjoy time together, and do pray for their safety as they travel back home on Tuesday. So, Lord, we thank you for your grace and mercy in watching over us, and pray that this time is honoring to you. It's in your Son's name I pray. Amen. All right, so we are in 1 Samuel chapter 23. And we are just going to pick up where we left off last week as we're just surveying through this book. We ended chapter 22 with Saul killing off the priests at Nob, and this was as a result of David's lie and deception, and David really took it to heart. He knew that he had been guilty of shedding the blood. Chapter 22, verse 21, Abiathar told David that Saul had killed the priests of Yahweh. Then David said to Abiathar, I knew on that day when Doeg the Edomite was there that he would surely tell Saul, it is I who have turned against every person in your father's household. Stay with me, do not be afraid, for he who seeks my life seeks your life, for you are safe with me. So David understood the gravity of what had happened. It was because of his actions that Saul murdered the priest that he did, and that's where we leave off. So we continue David's escape from Saul as he is fleeing, and starting verse 1 of chapter 23, I'm just going to read the first 14 verses and then comment on a few things. Then they told David, saying, Behold, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah and are pillaging the threshing floors. So David asked of Yahweh, saying, Shall I go and strike these Philistines? And Yahweh said to David, Go and strike the Philistines and save Keilah. But David's men said to him, Behold, we are afraid here in Judah. Here in Judah, how much more then if we go to Keilah against the battle lines of the Philistines? Then David asked of Yahweh once more, and Yahweh answered him and said, Arise, go down to Keilah, and I will give the Philistines into your hand. So David and his men went to Keilah and fought with the Philistines, and he led away their livestock and struck them with a great slaughter. Thus David saved the inhabitants of Keilah. Now it happened when Abiathar the son of Ahimelech fled to David at Keilah, that he came down with an ephod in his hand. Then it was told to Saul that David had come to Keilah. So Saul said, God has delivered him into my hand, for he shut himself in by entering a city with double gates and bars. Then Saul summoned all the people for battle to go down to Keilah to besiege David and his men. But David knew that Saul was plotting evil against him, so he said to Abiathar the priest, Bring the ephod here. Then David said, O Yahweh, the God of Israel, your slave has heard for certain that Saul is seeking to come to Keilah to make the city a ruin on my account. Will the men of Keilah surrender me into his hand? Will Saul come down just as your slave has heard? O Yahweh, the God of Israel, I pray, tell your slave. And Yahweh said, He will come down. Then David said, Will the men of Keilah surrender me and my men into the hand of Saul? And Yahweh said, They will surrender you. Then David and his men, about 600, arose and departed from Keilah, and they went wherever they could go. Now it was told to Saul that David had escaped from Keilah, so he ceased going out in pursuit. And David stayed in the wilderness in the strongholds and remains in the hill country in the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul sought him every day, but God did not give him into his hand. So we have this battle that takes place in Keilah, and we want to just kind of look for some of the significance of this particular section, understanding what is happening here, because as you're reading Old Testament narrative, sometimes you get these, as you're going along the path of the narrative, you get just what I say is somewhat of a tangent, or just this little tidbit that gets put in there, and you're wondering, why would we have this extra battle? What all is happening? What is the significance that is happening here? And you can see within it that Keilah was not a safe place for David to go. And so this would have been just the southwest of where they had been. It's not a good place, just as far as strategic. It's closer to where Saul is at. The city would have been, as Saul mentioned, David would have been trapped in the city. So most likely it was a walled city that had a single gate. And that is part of the fear of David being trapped in there. There's the fear of, will the inhabitants of Keilah surrender David over to it? So there's a lot of reasons as to why David should not go to Keilah, just for his own safety. He knows that if Saul can get a hold of him, he is going to probably lose his life. And but in this, we see David's continued faithfulness to God, in that he goes before the Lord, asking the Lord whether or not he should go. Should he go and fight the Philistines? Verse 2, so David asked of Yahweh, shall I go and strike these Philistines? And what does God tell him? Go and strike the Philistines and save Keilah. At the start of this, I think we just can see a little bit of uncertainty on David's part as to what he should do, but David had already beat the Philistines once, and when he killed Goliath. So I don't think it was a matter of him questioning whether or not he could do it. I think it was a matter of him just questioning, is this the right move for me? And so he inquires of God, and God says, go, save Keilah. Put your life at risk, put your freedom at risk, but go and do that. And as David heads down there, Yahweh emphasizes who would deliver the Philistines into David's hands, emphasizing God's sovereignty. And that is something as we're reading throughout 1 Samuel and just how David is fleeing from Saul and all these various little battles. You just see God's sovereignty all throughout the situation. Uh, so as David goes in there, Saul recognizes that uh, verse 7. Then it was told to Saul that David had come to Keilah, so Saul said, God has delivered him into my hand, for he shut himself in by entering a city with double gates and bars. So Saul thought that God was on his side now. God is delivering David into the hands of Saul, but we know that is not the case because David would escape. David knew that Saul was plotting against him. So he said to Abiathar the priest, bring the ephod here. Now remember, the ephod being part of the priestly garments, this would have been used in going before the God to determine God's will. This would have included the Urim and the Thummim. It's part of the inquiry with God. And so that's why David is specifically asking for the ephod as he prays out to God, what is going to happen. And God says that yes, Saul will come down, and that the men of Keilah would surrender David into Saul. They would let him. They would give him up. But we see ultimately that what happens is God protects David. David is able to escape. Now, what I find interesting here is in verse 13, at the end of it, it says, now it was told to Saul that David had escaped from Keilah, so he ceased going out in pursuit. Saul at this point stops going out in pursuit after David. But does he stop trying to capture David? No, because in the next verse, we see David stayed in the wilderness in the strongholds and remained in the hill country in the wilderness of Ziph, and Saul sought him every day. So Saul was still seeking after David. And so what I'm thinking is happening here is Saul is still sending people out, searching the wilderness. And what we have to understand about the wilderness here is we're talking about barren rocks, cliffs. It would have been very difficult for you to just find someone. Because you could go within the cliffs, you could hide within the caves and be very well hidden. We see caves all throughout this book and just how they are used. So Saul is not personally going out, which would make sense. A king isn't going to go and spend his time in the wilderness hunting every day for one individual. No, he's got people to do that. And remembering that this is a very small amount of land geographically. So it would have had to have been very rugged for David to successfully hide in all the rocks and crevices and caves. Again, it's just showing God's hand over David. Who knows how many times Saul and David were within a matter of a couple hundred yards of each other, and David was managing to escape. It would have been interesting to just see how all that movement happened. But David's deliverance from Keilah, I think, once again shows that God was going to continue to have David do what David was supposed to do, but God would protect him, and God would keep him safe from Saul, regardless of how close or how close to Saul he was, or how dire the circumstances might seem. Verse 15, Saul continues his pursuit of David here. It says, then David saw that Saul had come out to seek his life. Now David was in the wilderness of Ziph at Horesh. So Jonathan, Saul's son, arose and went to David at Horesh and strengthened his hand in God. And he said to him, do not be afraid, because the hand of Saul my father will not find you, and you will be king over Israel, and I will be second to you, and Saul my father knows that also. So the two of them cut a covenant before Yahweh, and David stayed at Horesh while Jonathan went to his house. Then Ziphites came up to Saul at Gibeah, saying, is David not hiding with us in the strongholds at Horesh on the hill of Hakilah? which is on the south of Jeshimon. So now, O king, according to all the desire of your soul to come down here, and our part shall be to surrender him into the king's hand. And Saul said, May you be blessed of Yahweh, for you have had compassion on me. Go now, make sure, and know all see his place where his very foot is, and who has seen him there, for I am told that he is very crafty. So see and know about all the hiding places where he hides himself, and return to me with certainty, and I will go with you, and if he is in the land, I will search him out among all the thousands of Judah. Then they arose and went to Ziph before Saul. Now David and his men were in the wilderness of Maon in the Arabah to the south of Jeshimon. So just pausing there for a moment. At the first part of this section, we see Jonathan making this covenant with David. This is interesting. Jonathan and David were best of friends. Jonathan is essentially betraying his own father here at this point, but we see a prince recognizing the true king that is to be in David and acknowledging that and solidifying their relationship with this covenant. Jonathan pledges his loyalty and service to David and points out the fact that Saul knows all this. And this is part of the reason, this is the reason that Saul felt threatened by David, because he knew David is going to take over the throne. And then we have the Ziphites that come and appear to Saul, and they're saying, Come, if you come down, we will deliver David to you. So what does Saul ask them to do? He asks them to go out, find all the various hiding places where David is, make sure that he is there, and then come back and report it to me. Saul wants to know with certainty that they know where David is and that they will, in fact, surrender him. And so they do after they do that, and this then spurs Saul to go out and pursue David even further. Picking back up verse 25, so Saul and his men went out to seek him, and they told David, and he came down to the rock and stayed in the wilderness of Maon. And Saul heard it and pursued David in the wilderness of Maon. And Saul went on the side of the mountain, and David and his men on the other side of the mountain. And David was hurrying to get away from Saul, but Saul and his men were surrounding David and his men to seize them. So, pausing there, obviously the intel that Saul had gotten from the Ziphites had been helpful, because Saul is now able to, most likely he's divided his men, because it says he's surrounding David. David having been on one side of the mountain, Saul on the other. Saul has separated his men. They are surrounding David. They are closing in here. And it, once again, does not look good for David. But a messenger came to Saul saying, Hurry and come, for the Philistines have made a raid on the land. So Saul returned from pursuing David and went to meet the Philistines. Therefore they called that place the Rock of Escape. Then David went up from there and stayed in the strongholds of En-gedi. So Saul is so close. He's got David surrounded. David has very little room to escape here. And then how does God deliver David? Sends a messenger, or God sends a messenger to Saul and says, oh, the Philistines are attacking Saul. So what does Saul do? Packs up his men, goes back to fight the Philistines. So just in a matter of a very short period of time, David went from being surrounded by Saul's men to almost being captured to having a way of escape, simply by God's sovereignty. And God sending this messenger to say the Philistines were needing to be dealt with. Then David went up from there and stayed in the strongholds of En-gedi. So David's able to continue to hide and run from Saul, and God continues to protect him in that regard. Chapter 24, probably one of the most well-known chapters that we remember from our childhood Sunday school days. Right? Now, when Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he was told, "Behold, David is in the wilderness of En-gedi." Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men from all Israel and went to seek David and his men in front of the rocks of the wild goats. Just something about the names here. We don't know specifically where these particular caves are, like which cave was the rock of the wild goats. Uh, but the name does have some significance, and that is because it just points out the seclusiveness of these caves. Wild goats would have been in these caves for their own protection, most likely being hidden from predators. So it just again emphasizes the seclusiveness of these rocks and caves. And he came to the sheepfolds on the way that where there was a cave, and Saul went in to relieve himself. Now David and his men were sitting in the inner recesses of the cave. So David had gone in there hiding and running from Saul. Must be a pretty deep cave in order for them to get back far enough and Saul and his men to not realize there were people deeper into the cave. Saul goes in to relieve himself. Then the men of David said to him, "Behold, this is the day of which Yahweh said to you, Behold, I am about to give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as it seems good in your eyes." Then David arose and cut off the edge of Saul's robe secretly. So David's men see this day as the day of deliverance for David. He'll finally be able to kill his enemy Saul, and they wholeheartedly believe that is what God has in store for this day. But that is not how it unfolds, and I don't think that's what David thought was supposed to happen on that day. David arose and cut off the edge of Saul's robe secretly. And it happened afterward that David's heart struck him because he had cut off the edge of Saul's robe. So the cutting off of Saul's robe secretly was gives David the opportunity to see and to be able to eventually tell Saul that he was not intending to kill him at that time. He could have, but he spared him. However, just the cutting off of the robe, which the touching of the robe would have been akin to touching the king himself, David understood the gravity of that, and that's what gets to him, and he recognizes what he has done, and he says to his men, he said to his men, "Far be it from me because of Yahweh that I should do this thing, my Lord." To my Lord, the anointed of Yahweh, to send forth my hand against him, since he is the anointed of Yahweh. And so David recognized that even though Saul was pursuing him, Saul had set out to was trying to kill David. David still understood who Saul was, still understood and recognized the authority that was above him, and that authority was put there by God and anointed by God. David tore his men to pieces with these words and did not allow them to rise up against Saul. And Saul arose, left the cave, and went on his way. So with his words, David gives the lecture to his men so that they will not pursue Saul. We don't know exactly how many men were in the cave with David, but there obviously would have been enough to overcome a man who was alone relieving himself in the cave. But David holds them back and says, "It is not right that I even touched the anointed." Keeps them from pursuing and rising up against Saul, and allows Saul to escape and to go on his way. Now afterward, David arose and went out of the cave and called after Saul, saying, "My lord the king." And when Saul looked behind him, David bowed with his face to the ground and prostrated himself. And David said to Saul, "Why do you listen to the words of men, saying, Behold, David seeks to do you evil? Behold, this day your eyes have seen that Yahweh had given you today into my hand in the cave, and some said to kill you, but my eye had pity on you, and I said, I will not send forth my hand against my Lord, for he is the anointed of Yahweh. Now my father, see the edge of your robe in my hand, for in that I cut off the edge of your robe and did not kill you. Know and see that there is no evil or transgression in my hand, and I have not sinned against you, though you are lying in wait for my life to take it. May Yahweh judge between you and me, and may Yahweh avenge me on you, but my hand shall not be against you. So David goes before he follows Saul out, catches his attention, and then begins to plead and beg with Saul about the fact that David had just spared Saul's life. But look at the position that David takes before Saul. He prostrates himself. He bows before the king as he is pleading. He could have just manned up, gotten in front of him, and said, look, I could have just killed you. But instead, he does it with humility and pleading before the king. Challenges the king as to why the king is listening to his own men and how they are pleading with Saul to kill David. But David points out to how Yahweh had given Saul into David's hands, but chose to spare Saul's life. And he gives the evidence of it with the robe. I find it interesting as Saul's leaving the cave, he doesn't recognize that part of his robe has been cut off, but in any case, David is before him and is pleading with him. There's another endearing term that we see here in verse 11. What does David call Saul? Father. Okay. So he's just recognizing again the authority of Saul over him. Again in verse 11, David points out that he has not sinned against Saul, even though Saul has been trying to kill him. In verse 13, we have this kind of just a proverb, pithy little saying, as MacArthur calls it. As the proverb of the ancient says, out of the wicked comes forth wickedness, but my hand shall not be against you. After whom has the king of Israel come out? Whom are you pursuing? After a dead dog, after a single flea? Therefore Yahweh be judge and execute justice between you and me, and may he see and plead my cause and execute justice for me to escape from your hand. So David challenges Saul with, who am I? Why are you pursuing me? Why are you pursuing a dead dog, a worthless flea? David is trying to show that he is harmless to Saul. But Saul knows that David will be king. But David is doing everything he can to plead before Saul, saying, I'm harmless. Why do you keep pursuing me? And then makes this challenge before Saul. Therefore Yahweh be judge and execute justice between you and me. And may he see and plead my cause and execute justice for me to escape from your hand. So he's calling upon God before Saul, saying, may God show justice here and allow me to continue to escape from your hand. Now it happened that when David had finished speaking these words, verse 16, Saul said, is this your voice, my son David? Then Saul lifted up his voice and wept. And he said to David, you are more righteous than I, for you have dealt well with me, while I have dealt evil with you. And you have declared today that you have done good to me, that Yahweh surrendered me into your hand, and yet you did not kill me. For if a man finds his enemy, will he let him go away safely? May Yahweh therefore reward you with good in return for what you have done to me this day. So Saul answers back to David and recognizes what David had done, the mercy that David had shown, And it drives Saul to weep. He's understanding the mercy that had been shown. He recognizes that David is more righteous than Saul. And for you have dealt with me while I have dealt evil with you. Saul's recognizing the evil he has done against David, the righteousness that David had been living, and how David had been sparing Saul, and this is convicting Saul. Now, one of the questions that we see about Saul as we near the end of his life um, is, did he really come to ever know the Lord? I think there's strong evidence that says he did, and I think passages like this where we start to see a change in who Saul was and how he is responding to David, to God's mercy, are just an indicator that his heart had been changing. And one of the other great indicators is you read the book of Ecclesiastes, and that reads like a man who understood his relationship before God. Uh, but you just have little passages like this where we begin to see Saul's heart changing towards Yahweh. Uh, so, and Saul points out that if a man finds his enemy, what does he do? He kills his enemy. But he had been spared, and I think is thankful for that. So now, behold, verse 20, I know that you will surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel will be established in your hand. So now swear to me by Yahweh that you will not cut off my seed after me, and that you will not destroy my name from my father's household. So David swore to Saul, and Saul went to his home, but David and his men went up to the fortress. So Saul here at the end of 24 acknowledges that David will be king, and then he has one request of David, and that is that David would not wipe out his family. Okay, so pop quiz. Who is the one heir of Saul that David does not wipe out? But yeah, yeah, yeah. The crippled Mephibosheth. Yeah, I can't say it either. Mephibosheth. Okay, so we do see that this promise is fulfilled later on. We start verse 25, and I find this verse 1 very interesting. For everything that Samuel did, he does not go out in a blaze of glory. He is given one verse that simply says, yep, Samuel died. They buried him in Ramah. And David arose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. I just find it interesting that very little attention is given to the death of Samuel. But I think that also speaks to just the role of Samuel in general as a prophet of God. He was to point people to God. It wasn't about Samuel. It was about God, about Yahweh. And he had simply just been used in that capacity by Yahweh. David and Abigail here, starting in verse 2. Now there was a man in Maon whose work was in Carmel, and the man was very great, and he had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. And it happened while he was shearing his sheep in Carmel. Now the man's name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. And the woman was good in sight and beautiful in appearance, but the man was harsh and evil in his dealings, and he was a Calebite. That David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep. So David sent 10 young men, and David said to the young men, go up to Carmel, come to Nabal, and greet him in my name, and thus you shall say, have a long life, peace be to you, and peace be to your house, and peace be to all that you have. So now I have heard that you have shearers. Now your shepherds have been with us, and we have not dishonored them, nor have they missed anything all the days they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore, let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we have come on a festive day. Please give us whatever you find at hand to your servants and to your son, to David. Then David's young men came and spoke to Nabal according to all these words in David's name. Then they waited. So David, they come to Carmel, and there's he gives instructions to his men to approach Nabal, to greet him, to be nice, to be friends, to say, we've treated your people well as they've been in our presence. And so David is looking here probably to replenish supplies, but just uh, trying to maintain good relationships in the land. Uh, but this Nabal, we understand, is a very harsh man. And we see that in how he responds to David and his request and his approach to them. But Nabal answered David's servants and said, who is David, and who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants today who are each breaking away from his master. Shall I then take my bread and my water and my meat that I have slaughtered for my shearers and give it to men whose origin I do not know? So Nabal answers harshly. He says, who is David? Uh, why should I help him out? Why should I take all this and help David? So David's young men went back on their way and returned, and they came and told him according to all these words. Then David said to his men, each of you gird on his sword. So each man girded on his sword, and David also girded on his sword, and about 400 men went up behind David, and 200 stayed with the baggage. So David made the request peacefully at first for help and for guidance and just, again, help from Nabal. Nabal answers harshly, so what does David do? He says, okay, we're going to take it by force. We're going to gird up our men. Now, something that's interesting here about the number, how many total men are we up to? We're up to 600 men now. Just a few chapters earlier in chapter 22, David's army, David's followers were 400. So in the course of these 4 chapters, David's following, his entourage, had grown by 200 men. That's pretty significant in the wilderness. And what that shows us is that David is gaining, he's gaining power, he's gaining popularity, he's gaining a following. And so his little army is growing. So 200 of them stay with the baggage, and 400 of them go. But one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, saying, behold, David sent messengers from the wilderness to greet our master, and he rushed at them angrily. Yet the men were very good to us, and we were not dishonored, nor did we miss anything, as long as we went about with them while we were in the field. They were a wall to us both by night and by day, and all the time we were with them shepherding the sheep. So now know and see what you should do, for evil is decided against our master and against all his household, and he is such a vile man that no one can speak to him. So this is essentially a warning to Abigail, saying, we have a wicked master. This is how he treated David, but this is how David had treated us, the shepherds, in caring for us and protecting us. And you need to decide what you're going to do. Are you going to stay loyal to your harsh husband, or what else are you going to do? And we see a very wise choice on Abigail's behalf here. Then Abigail hurried and took 200 loaves of bread and 2 jugs of wine and 5 sheep already prepared and 5 seahs of roasted grain and 100 clusters of raisin and 200 cakes of figs, and loaded them on donkeys. Then she said to her young men, go on before me, behold, I am coming after you. But she did not tell her husband Nabal. So Nabal was unwilling to provide anything, and what does she do? She loads up a feast. She loads up enough to feed these 400 men that are coming after her husband. So it was happening as she was riding on her donkey and coming down by the hidden part of the mountain, that behold, David and his men were coming down toward her, and she met them. Now David had said, surely for a lie I have guarded all that this man has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him, and he has returned me evil for good. May God do so to the enemies of David, and more also, if by morning I leave as much as one male of any who belong to him. Then Abigail said to David, Then Abigail saw David, so she hurried and dismounted from her donkey and fell on her face before David and bowed herself to the ground. And she fell at his feet and said, On me alone, my lord, be the blame, and please let your maidservant speak in your ears and listen to the words of your maidservant. So David is ready to completely wipe out Nabal and all the men. And he says, May it be on me if one man is spared. And so as he is getting ready to pursue Nabal and carry out that onslaught, he's intercepted by Abigail, and she prostrates herself before the king. And she begins pleading. And she starts it with, May the blame be on me. She's essentially taking part of the responsibility for Nabal's actions, but in any case, she's showing complete humility and simply asks the king to listen to the maidservant so that she can plead. Please do not let my lord pay attention to this vile man Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and wicked foolishness is with him. But I, your maidservant, did not see the young men of my lord, whom you sent. So she points out how vile her husband is, and excuses the fact, or seeks the excuse that she did not see. Had she seen, maybe things would have been different. There would have been a better greeting. And so she's pleading with the king to take this into consideration. And then calls upon David Yahweh. Now, my Lord, as Yahweh lives and as your soul lives, since Yahweh has restrained you from shedding blood and from saving yourself by your own hand, so now let your enemies and those who seek evil against my Lord be as Nabal. So now let this gift which your servant woman has brought to my Lord be given to the young man who went about with my Lord. Please forgive the transgression of your maidservant. For Yahweh will certainly make for my Lord an enduring house, because my Lord is fighting the battle of Yahweh, and evil will not be found in you all your days. So she is pleading for David to spare her, to spare the people, but also calls for Yahweh to destroy the enemies of David. She recognizes that David is called of Yahweh and calls that before him and surrenders herself before that. And recognize, and then accounts to David that evil will not be found in you all your days. So she's recognizing the righteousness and holiness of David. And and should anyone rise up to pursue and seek your life, then the life of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living with Yahweh your God. But the lives of your enemies he will sling out from the hollow of a sling. And it will be that when Yahweh does for my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and appoints you ruler over Israel, then this will not cause stumbling or a troubled heart to my Lord, both by having shed blood without cause, and by the Lord having saved himself. When Yahweh deals well with my Lord, then remember your maidservant. Then David said to Abigail, Blessed be Yahweh, the God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me. And blessed be your discernment, and blessed be you who have kept me this day from bloodshed and from saving myself by my own hand. So Abigail's plea before David works. He relents. He recognizes the good in which Abigail had done. Essentially thanks her for it, blesses God, blesses her discernment because of her actions. Nevertheless, as Yahweh the God of Israel, verse 34, lives, who has restrained me from harming you, unless you had hurried and come to meet me, surely there would not have been left to Nabal until the morning light as much as one is male. So David received from her hand, and she had brought him and said to her, Go up to your house in peace. See, I have listened to your voice and granted your request. Then Abigail came to Nabal, and behold, he was holding a feast in his house like the feast of a king. And Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunk, so she did not tell him anything small or great until the morning light. But in the morning, when the wine had gone out to Nabal, his wife told him these things, and his heart died within him, so that he became as a stone. Now it happened that about 10 days later, Yahweh smote Nabal, and he died. See, David was going after Nabal to kill him. Abigail steps in, pleads with David to relent and to not do it. Uh, and she goes back and tells Nabal all that had happened. Nabal's having this feast, he's celebrating, he gets drunk, and what happens? God takes him out. He says his heart dies within him, and he became as a stone. Many would say that what happened here is that Nabal had a stroke, and he basically was in a comatose type state at this point. See, God didn't need David to go in and wipe out Nabal and all his men to deal with Nabal's harshness. God was going to take care of that. And so God does exactly that. Nabal becomes a stone, and then 10 days later, God takes Nabal's life. He punishes Nabal for his wickedness and just his harshness and the evil intentions of his heart. So Abigail is left widowed at this point, and picking up verse 39, then David heard that Nabal was dead, so he said, "Blessed be Yahweh, who has pleaded the cause of my reproach from the hand of Nabal, and has kept back his servant from evil. Yahweh has also returned the evil of Nabal on his own head." Then David sent a proposal to Abigail to take her as his wife. Then the servants of David came to Abigail at Carmel and spoke to her, saying, "David has sent us to you to take you as his wife." And she arose and bowed with her face to the ground and said, "Behold, your maidservant is a servant woman to wash the feet of my Lord's servants." Then Abigail hurried and arose, and she rode on a donkey with her 5 young women who went about with her, and she went after the messengers of David and became his wife. David had also taken Ahinoam of Jezreel, and they both became his wives. Now Saul had given Michal, his daughter, David's wife, to Palti, the son of Laish, who was from Galim. So Nabal dies, and David takes Abigail as his wife. David takes a second wife in this, Ahinoam, and we don't know too much about her. And I find it interesting that there's just this tangent of David gets Abigail, he gets this other gal, and his other wife is given to someone else, Palti, the son of Laish. What's significant here? Well, one of the things that we begin to see even more so with David that I think is important to see is the women in David's life, and the fact that there were multiple women, multiple wives, and yes, culturally it would have been permitted, but it wasn't good in God's eyes. But these actions, you're going to see really lay the groundwork for David's eventual sin with Bathsheba. And we don't want to read, and I know that's further on, but the sin with Bathsheba came about because of David's history. It wasn't just a spur of the moment thing where he's standing out on the rooftop, sees her, and then, oh, I'm going to do this. No, this was a heart that had been actually ruled by his own selfishness, his own lusts, his own desires, that was just given the opportunity to pursue Bathsheba. And we see that as we are reading David's life leading up to that. So with these 3 chapters, what are some just points of application? Well, one of them I just want to point out is just the importance of recognizing the authority in our lives, and that Yahweh has put authority in our lives, and we do have a responsibility before them. In our day and age, a lot of the authority placed in our lives is wicked authority. Saul was too. But David still recognized his place before the king, and there is something that we as believers ought to see in that we have to recognize God's anointing of authority that has been placed above us, and that we do have a responsibility before God in how we respond to the authorities above us. We also continue to see God's sovereignty in this situation, that despite how dire the situation is, God is still in control. Despite how much we think we know the answers and we're going to pursue it and do things our way, sometimes if we just stop from the action and step back and watch God work, God will resolve situations without needing our help. David was ready to kill Nabal with 400 of his men, but God stopped him, and not a single man was used of David's army to kill Nabal. God did it entirely on his own. And so, again, that is something that we can see in this. And then just seeing just the precursors of the opportunities that David had to sin, that was working in his heart. That would have been developing desires within him that would lead to eventual sin that broke him before the Lord. Yes. I don't know that he dishonored her by taking her as his wife, um, but um, the only option would have been to just let her go, and she would have eventually been taken as someone else's wife. In one sense, he protects her by taking her um, as a wife. It's kind of hard to read some of the emotions in the text because we simply say, David calls and sends a proposal, I want you as my wife. She responds culturally, that would have been the proper response. Oh, the king wants me to take me as his wife. I better respond accordingly and become his wife. Um, because we see uh, who was it that stood up to a king when uh, he wanted her to be his wife and do things she didn't want to do? And how did that almost get her into trouble? Remember? Queen Esther. Um, okay. So yeah, there is a certain element in which, as a woman, didn't uh, you didn't tell the king no. Could David have simply have let her go? Yes, she would have become someone else's wife. Um, but he does take her as his wife. Um, and again, I find it interesting that we have this mention of this other wife that's taken at the same time. Um, and what is the significance there as to why there were the two of them taken? So, yeah, that's where we end up with 25. Now, next week, Ben is going to pick up and take on the next three chapters. So I invite you all to come back next week, and I will be sitting in nice Southern California where this past week it was over 100 degrees down there. So we'll see how things go. But let's close in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for this morning. Thank you for just what we were seeing here in 1 Samuel, and pray for your blessings on the remainder of the day and on the service to come. It's in your Son's name I pray.